Football betting show, June 9th. We're previewing the Big Ten East Division. We're going Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, Indiana, Michigan State, Maryland, and then Rutgers on this show. We got Ralph Michaels from WagerTalk.com, Robbie Veno from SportsMemo.com, Ralph at CalSportsLV on Twitter. Good follow. Give him a follow. How you doing this morning, buddy?
Doing good. Getting ready. And, the more I reach out to some people and, now's the time to get those preseason guides for football. A couple I want to mention. Athlons is out. They still do a good job. I talked to Mark Lawrence. His is to the press. He shot me out a copy. Phil Steele will be going to press July 7th. And Kenny White somewhere in between there. So order those preseason copies to help yourself out.
Okay, so July 7th, Phil Steele, and To the Press from Mark Lawrence. That's a good one as well. I recommend that. We got Robbie Veno at Rob Veno Sports on Twitter. Robbie, welcome in, buddy.
Good afternoon, Drew. You are my eyes to Las Vegas. I get to see you walk the street, show me what's going on, walk inside casinos, show me what's going on. I can keep in touch just by following your Twitter account. Hey, real quick, guys, on the Phil Steele magazine, something that I noticed a couple of days ago is that you're not going to be able to pick that up on newsstands this year, so you need to order it. Generally speaking, I myself just go down to the newsstand and pick these things up in one shot, but I was reading on his website a couple of days ago that it's only available by mail, so go ahead and order it that way because it's not going to be in stores this year.
Yeah, and, I'll just tell you a bonus. Having been there, 20 years that I worked there, he said his last pages are going to press July 7th. That's probably like a 14 to 17-day turnaround to get it. So the printing press prints those last pages, gets them sent back out. And if you do order, I do suggest the online as well. You can get the app. That'll probably be up a few days after. Drew, I think Phil will probably send some to the gamblers just because that's a one-off. But you are correct, Rob. If you do want to order, just you have to go to philsteele.com and order online.
Yeah, that's a good kind of reference there in terms of Phil Steele. But, keep in mind a little bit there, Ralph, is the odds makers get to read that too. So how much of an advantage do you think it is reading Phil Steele to actually help sports bettors with college football?
Well, Phil's come out later and later, so he's irrelevant now as far as the numbers go. I mean, it used to be where, I remember when I was there, we would have bookmakers calling us, asking us, paying us big dollar for preview copies because they didn't want to set their win totals. But the college football game has changed. There's more and more publications putting things out early. Connolly does a great job. He's putting out early numbers in January. So the market's changed where they're not reliant on Phil. And in fact, now Phil has decided to go a different direction. Instead of trying to be the first one out, if you follow him on Twitter, he talks to over 100 coaches that go through the roster. So when you're getting his lineup, it may be much later, but it's a much more accurate projected starting lineup for the Phil Steele product now than it was just 5 to 10 years ago.
Yeah, and no harder year to do it than this year, right, Ralph, with all the transfer portal action? Almost better to be later at this time.
I think you have to be. I shot him an email, and I said it's going to be mandatory. People don't realize that this transfer portal is brand new. Remember, it just started October of 2018. So this is the first full season. But you have kids that, maybe they're more active this year because there was no spring camp. But we had a starting receiver from Nebraska just go out. We had another starter from Penn State just go out. So, there's teams that have 20 plus people in the transfer portal, and we're seeing more and more starters join the portal each day.
All right, guys, we got Guitar Rat in the house saying he ordered Mark Lawrence's product over a month ago. Hopefully it gets out soon. And Guitar Rat, I think you should order the Phil Steele magazine. It does help me out. It's a great reference point. Anyway, is what I would recommend. But guys, we got to get into the Big Ten East. We only got about 50 minutes left now to get over 7 teams here. So we got Ohio State. I guess start at the top here of last year's standings, Big Ten East Division. Ohio State, the Buckeyes, of course, 13-1, their sole loss coming in the playoffs to Clemson in a controversial game to some. I know the Buckeyes faithful would think that. 10-0 in the Big Ten, 7-0 at home, obviously 6-0 on the road. 9-4 ATS. If you were betting the Buckeyes last year, you made a killing. In 6-6, I got them as an over/under with one push here. So depending what the closing number is, over/under right about on par. The odds makers were. But Robbie, what are you thinking here? The Buckeyes coming up this season.
Well, they do have a coordinator switch here, guys. They're going to have Kerry Coombs come back to Columbus and run the defense here. And, you know, Kerry Coombs is a guy, just the defense is going to remain the same. They're not generally going to make any transformation to the alignment or the set that they currently run from. But he's a secondary guy, and he coached at Tennessee in the NFL last year with the Titans. And a quote from Kerry Coombs was, the Tennessee Titans were the only team in the NFL, period, the only team out of 32 to play every single pass coverage available right now until they invent the new one. So he's going to bring all those pass coverages to Ohio State. He learned under Dean Pease. Just to give you a quote from him, we played 3 deep, we played 2 deep, we played quarters press man, 0 man-to-man, 2 deep man-to-man. Their base alignment is going to be with a single high safety. Now, the only reason I mention that is because when you go through their positional groups this year, Ohio State's, there is somewhat of a concern about the secondary. So I know they reload talent, but they've lost a lot of talent, and we don't want to take too much away from their power rating just because they've lost some secondary members. But when you're going to add to the playbook so many coverages that maybe Ohio State has not played before, and you know, Ohio State was, I think they're the only team in this division, Ralph, correct me if I'm wrong, that had spring practices. I think I saw zeros across the board with the exception of Ohio State, who had 3. There may be another team that had a spring practice here. But that's not enough, Drew, to get on field with new guys in the secondary, new starters at least, and teach so many different coverages too. It probably will start off slow, and he'll gradually implement as they get used to things. And the beginning of the season for them does start off Bowling Green, Buffalo, and Rutgers. In between that, there was a game against Oregon where you have to go out there. So maybe we see a little confusion in the secondary in that game. Last year, it's a 9-5 ATS team, a 7-7 over/under team. I just want to point out a couple of things about how dominant this team was last year in red zone production last year, guys. How about the Ohio State Buckeyes? They had 33 more chances inside the red zone than their opponents. That's a ton. And they scored 34 more touchdowns in the red zone than their opponents did. The next 2 competitors in this division, Michigan and Penn State, if you just want to put it into context, Ohio State scored 34 more red zone touchdowns than their opponents. This is only in Big Ten play. Michigan had 11, so they've gotten 23 more TDs than Michigan in the red zone, and Penn State had 14. So as good as Michigan and Penn State are, and they sit fairly high in my power ratings, it still shows the distance between Ohio State and the rest of the field here. The schedule, for the most part, I mean, your Ohio State, it looks doable, but they do have a road game against Penn State on the 24th of October. We'll see what that brings. I'm interested early on. I have a little asterisk, guys, next to Ohio State as a potential over team in game situations, just because I think the secondary might be a little shaky to start the year. And remember, they had this a couple years back where the secondary was shaky and they gave up a bunch of points, but they're able to outscore people. I think that might be the case here again early. So I may be looking at Ohio State and playing overs on a weekly basis until we see the secondary settle in and be consistently strong. They won't be what last year's was, but after a while, they're going to get it. I think Kerry Coombs is going to bring an added dimension to this defense.
Yeah, Ralph, that week 2 game in Eugene, I guess top candidate for College Game Day. That's going to be very telling for Ohio State. But what are you thinking for the Buckeyes here?
Well, you know, let's go back and answer Robbie's question. I do have Ohio State with couple practices. Indiana had 4. When we talk about the Big Ten West next week, Northwestern and Purdue each had 8. They were the top 2. Indiana was 4. They were next. So besides Indiana, Ohio State, no one got practices. I'm not as concerned about Coombs coming in and with the secondary. Remember, they've had co-DCs for the last few years, and Greg Madison was there with Schiano last year. Madison is still there with Kerry Coombs this year. Remember, Kerry Coombs was at Ohio State from 2012 to 2017 before he left for the Tennessee Titans job. So, he's very familiar with what they bring in. The sad thing was last year was the year Ohio State was supposed to be down. If you look at their recruiting, Ohio State was number 14 in the country last year. Okay, number 14. Michigan was number 8. Penn State was number 12. Nebraska was number 17. So Ohio State was about Nebraska as far as recruiting goes. You had a first-year head coach come in, and what do the Buckeyes do? Oh, they go 13-1. What were they in yards per game in the country? Number 1 in the country, plus 270 yards per game. What were they in points per game diff? Number 1 in the country, plus 33 points per game. And guess what? That was against the number 5 schedule. So they had 12 returning starters, a brand new head coach, only the number 14th recruiting class. So last year was the down year. So what do they do on a down year? Well, they lose to Clemson in the playoffs. Now they have, while they only have 10 returning starters this year, they do get an important transfer in Trey Sermon. It's where they needed him. With Dobbins gone, they needed a stud running back. And Sermon has 20 starts in 3 years at Oklahoma. So while the guy only had 4 starts last year because of the talent at Oklahoma, he's still a quality running back. This year, the recruiting class, number 5 in the country. I just want to point out next year, the kids that are committing to Ohio State now that'll sign in December, it looks to be like the best ever recruiting class in the history of college football. So, Ohio, their numbers are historical with the number of top 100 players they have signed for next year, if everybody signs, and the potential to get a couple number 1 position players. Again, it may be the greatest recruiting class ever. This year, number 5, not too bad. I look at Ohio State, and the 10 returning starters don't scare me because Michigan only has 11, and Michigan's without a quarterback. Penn State has 13. They do return their quarterback. You guys talked about that Oregon game. I have Oregon. I have Ohio State as a 6.9 favorite. And every other game, a double-digit favorite, except Penn State, which will be the whiteout. We'll talk about that a little more with Penn State. But that is my highest-rated home field edge in college football. Penn State at home in a night out. So if there's only half the fans in State College for that game, it'll be a huge edge to Ohio State. In that game, I have Ohio State minus 3.6 points. Fields will be the number 1 or number 2 quarterback picked right behind Trevor Lawrence. Fields is the Heisman favorite along with Trevor Lawrence. And, the secondary would concern me a lot more, Robbie. You were talking about the secondary. If Wade doesn't get that targeting call in that second half of Clemson and they beat Clemson, he probably would have been a number 1 pick in the draft. That would have given them 4 number 1 picks. He does come back, giving that an absolute solid corner. And it's a lot easier to coach the defense when you have a first-round NFL pick on one side of the field as your cornerback. Ohio State, run the table. Penn State's the only game in question. They're either 11-1 or 12-0 going into the Big Ten title game.
And Ralph, what do you have your numbers in front of you? What do you have them favored in Eugene week 2?
6.9.
Okay.
I have them as a touchdown favorite in Eugene, and I have them as a 3.6 favorite in Penn State. But with half a crowd, I make that a 5.6. I make them a 6-point favorite. I add 2 points. If I give Penn State a 6.5-point hedge for the night whiteout games. So that'll at least get cut in half. and make Ohio State closer to a touchdown favorite if there's only a 25% capacity. That game is October 24th, so just past midway through the season.
And how do you see this playing out in terms of attendance in the Big Ten? Do you think it will be a conference-wide thing? It will be up to each university? Do you see anything there?
Well, I think there's going to be some guideline, yes, because they want to protect the players. They want to protect the fans. I mean, who knows if a first round, if a player if a fan sits in the first row, is it possible he can give it to the cheerleader who could possibly walk past the player and give it to a player? You know, there's all those things we just don't know. So I think there will be some sort of guideline by the Big Ten saying, you know, we use a 25, a 40, or a 50% capacity of whatever your stadium is. But, you know, that's going to be to play out. But for Ohio State, it's clearly to their advantage because their toughest game, again, they go at Michigan State on October 17th, and then they play at Penn State that week later.
All right, guys, and it is Tuesday. Reminder, it is $2 Tuesday at WagerTalk.com. And Robbie, $2 Tuesday handicapper, huh?
Am I?
Maybe not.
Honestly, I did not know. I was last week. But this week, I don't know. I mean, there was a request sent out, but unfortunately for me, I'm just not well-versed in the sports that they want a $2 play on. So I don't think it's me, but if it is, I better get busy. Okay.
No, I just logged up WagerTalk here. So I think you guys, you missed it last week. I think at least right now you can get Robbie's NFL 5% play for $2 at WagerTalk.com. Right. So guys, we got Penn State coming up next year. Showing them 10-2 in the regular season last year, 6-6 ATS, 5-7 towards the under. So small trender towards the under here. Ralph, you were just talking about them, and Happy Valley, if it's just half attendance here, it will take some off of their home field advantage. They scored 412 points and only let up 169 last year. So not as impressive as Ohio State in terms of points scored and points let up, but pretty darn good here. What are you thinking for the Penn State Nittany Lions this upcoming year, Ralph?
You know, I have them as the number 24 schedule in the country this year. And, you know, you look at the schedule, you know, your Virginia Tech game is your second game, your first road game. I have them as a 6-point favorite. I have them as a 1-point dog to Michigan, the 3.6-point dog to Ohio State, which could be more. And then they're a touchdown favorite in the rest. So when I look at them, I give them 3 potential losses. And I have them ranked pretty high. I think they're a team that, the spring practices obviously hurt them like it does everyone else. But, you have a new OC in Kirk Karachi that came from Michigan, from Minnesota. So again, that hurts them a little more than most because in this division, you have 2 new head coaches. You have Mel Tucker at Michigan State. You have Schiano at Rutgers. But you have 4 new OCs, Penn State, Indiana, Michigan State, and the Rutgers situation. Penn State, again, last year, 11 returning starters. They were the number 12 recruiting class. While they went 7-2 in conference play, their turnovers helped them a lot. I tweeted something out, and pretty amazing stat. Penn State last year won 7 games that they were outgained in. So, it's normally 1 or 2, and then you outgain someone by 1 or 2 and lose. But to be 7 games that you got outgained and you won those games, that's something I don't think you come back from. Plus 3 close games shows they really weren't as competitive as their 11-2 record. So that has me have them falling back a little bit. They were only plus 46 yards per game. That's much closer to a 5-4 team, 6-3 at max, not that 7-2 team. This year they do come back, number 15 recruiting class. They're number 47 in terms of experience, which is 3rd in the Big Ten East behind Rutgers and Indiana. The 13 returning starters has them in a schedule where, again, you have a Kent State opener and you have San Jose State with that Virginia Tech game in between. They were a young team last year that went 4-1 on the road, 1-0 as an away dog. But they're young and wide receiver. If they could find some wide receivers besides their starting wide receiver, they have no one else with more than 6 career returning receptions. They have a new receiver coach. They have a new OC. They have a new O-line coach. They have a new DC coach. They have 16 transfers that left. That's not like an 11-2 team with James Franklin in his 7th year to have 16 transfers enter the portal. And you looking at 5 freshman wide receivers in the 3 deep. So a lot of youth in as far as the receivers go. I see them actually down a notch. And I have them actually finishing 3rd behind Ohio State and Michigan in the East.
Robbie, what do you got on Penn State this upcoming year, buddy?
Drew?
Yeah, Robbie, I think we're having a little technical difficulties on your end. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Yep, I got you now. Yep.
Okay. What do you got for Penn State, man?
Yeah, just to piggyback on what Ralph was saying with the wide receivers, Penn State extremely young outside the starter. And it's the same old story for these elite teams. 6 of the 11 wide receivers in their wide receiver room this year are blue chip recruits. So the talent's there, but the talent's very, very young. They got great news earlier this season when Shaka Toney decided he wasn't going to go to the NFL. It gives them a pair of bookend defensive ends that are going to be as good as any inside the country. And Micah Parsons, guys, could be our new version of Isaiah Simmons from Clemson last year. You know, Micah Parsons is a linebacker for Penn State, tremendous pass rusher, tremendous all-around player. And right now it looks like he's going to be the kick return on this team as well. So the last time we had a linebacker returning kicks, go back to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Brian Urlacher. It's not something that happens all the time, but this kid's a fantastic athlete, and certainly the defense, I think, is going to be top notch. I wouldn't be fooled. And, you know, the 3 of us have talked about this before, where you look quickly and you see a number of returning starters and you make a judgment based on that number. Don't make that judgment here, because Penn State could be, I mean, they feel like they could be better than they were last season, which was really, really good. The improvement's going to have to come from the offense. Obviously, last year, Sean Clifford's first year, it didn't work out all that well. They were down in the Big 12 total offense standings, and it's a reason why, as Ralph said, they were outgained in a lot of games, but still managed to win those ball games because the defense was so good. The offense broke loose against Memphis, which you have to take with a grain of salt in the bowl game, because Memphis defensively is a weak defensive club. But Journey Brown and Noah Kane running behind a stud-filled offensive line is a really good deal here. If there's anything that you would need when you're trying to integrate new wide receivers, when you have a new offensive coordinator, it would be a solid offensive line and a running game and a second-year quarterback. Penn State has all 3 of those. We'll see how quickly the wide receiving group can develop. Real quick here on Kirk Shiraka, the OC from Minnesota. You know, he's done something a little bit different here, guys. He came in and he blended Minnesota's playbook with Penn State's playbook, and they changed all the terminology so that it's not recognizable as Minnesota terminology. It's not recognizable as Penn State terminology. Now, according to him, the fact that they changed the playbook so early, I think second week of July, he said the whole thing was implemented, and the players have been able to study it online since January. He thinks that the mental part will be okay. It's always the on-field stuff, right? When you have no practices, we've said it a million times, the on-field execution is what's important here. We'll see. He gets a little bit of help because what Penn State did was they promoted their tight ends coach Tyler Bowen to co-OC, which helped in integrating the playbook, which helped in personnel for Kirk Shiraka because he wants to mold the offense around the personnel. In the end, I think it's going to all be okay. But early on, it might be somewhat choppy. I think you talk about the second, or you mentioned the second game of the season against Virginia Tech, Ralph. It'll be interesting to see if Penn State can go there, line up behind their offensive line, and run the football successfully. If they can, they're going to win that game. If they can't, I think that passing game could come into question. There's a huge 3-game stretch from October 3rd to October 24th with a bye in between where they go to Michigan, they're home to Iowa, and they're home to Ohio State. Arguably, their 3 toughest games of the season. And like I say, Michigan and Iowa are separated by a bye, but those are probably going to determine how Penn State fares this year. I think they would have preferred having a couple of those to the back end of the year when the passing game is settled in. But we'll see games 5, 6, and 7, how Penn State does in those 3. That'll be very, very important for them.
We got Maurice in the house, Josh CT. All saying, Penn State will have a really good defense. Ryan agreeing with them. Elliot, welcome in, guys. Anything you want to throw out there in terms of what you're seeing in the Big Ten? Throw it out in the chat box on YouTube here, and we'll get it out to the viewers. We got Michigan up next, guys. 9-3 straight up last year in the regular season. Scored 396 points, let up 234. 7-5 ATS, small gainer there, and 9-3 towards the over. So Michigan hitting a lot of overs last year, Ralph. What do you think for Big Blue this upcoming season?
Well, last year they had the 3rd most returning starters in the East. They had Ohio State at home. They had the top recruiting class in the Big Ten. And you had Shea Patterson, a 5-star recruit in the second season of an offense. So why was Michigan supposed to win the Big Ten last year? For all those reasons. So, a 6-3 record and a 9-4 overall record may be some for good folks, but it's not. It's not a good record. It's a disappointment. And, I continue to say I'm not sure why Harbaugh has a job. This team has the number 10 recruiting over the last 4 years. If I add up all their classes, they're a top 10 recruiting class. Well, that's not a 9-4 team. And when you say, well, maybe those kids didn't pan out. Do you know last year, besides LSU, Michigan had the most players drafted. So they have the talent there. So why can't you be competitive in the bowl games? Why can't you be competitive against Ohio State? You had 10 players drafted. Ohio State had 10 players drafted. LSU had 15. Those are the 3 highest. I do want to mention this, though. Like we talk returning starters, the 10 starters that Michigan has that are going to play in the NFL, 5 of those were 6th-round picks, and there were only 2 in the first 3 rounds, while Ohio State had, I think, 7 in the first 3 rounds. So there is NFL talent. It's not top-tier NFL talent. But if you have 10 players drafted from a team and you were only 9-4, I see serious issues there. What's happened is down the stretch, those 8 straight losses to Ohio State have cost them multiple wins. And we talk about that often. Don't let one loss become 2 losses. Well, if you look at the last 4 years at Michigan, all again losses against Ohio State when they thought they could beat them preseason. And then in their bowl games, 0-4 straight up, 0-4 ATS, and they failed to cover by 16 points per game. So clearly that Ohio State loss cost them in the bowl as well because of that disappointment. This year, though, no Shea Patterson. You only have 1 of 5 of your offensive linemen back. You return 11 starters overall. That's 3rd worst in the Big Ten. You're recruiting, you're back to 14. But I still think there would be an improvement. Gaddis, again, they made some hay down the stretch where I saw some improvement. Don Brown, I'm not a huge fan, but, Michigan plays it still pretty conservative where, their defense doesn't put them in bad spots. I look at their schedule and let me pull it up here as I lost it. You open the season at Washington. I have that game an absolute pick'em. I have Michigan a 0.1 favorite, but Wisconsin and Penn State. You're a 1-point favorite in each game at home. Then you go to Michigan State, and although Michigan State's way down, you still can't seem to beat your little brother. And then you go to Minnesota, and I have you as a 0.4 favorite. So in a stretch of 4 weeks, you have a pick'em game, a road game at Michigan State, and a road game at Minnesota. It's make or break at your season. I have them at 9 wins again. Another disappointment, but with those 9 wins, the way it plays out, I still have them second in the Big Ten, but clearly it's Ohio State and everyone else for me.
Ralph, great breakdown, man. Let me just ask you a follow-up question there, because you bring up Shea Patterson, and throughout his college career, highly recruited kid, highly touted, but we saw when he wasn't the quarterback at Ole Miss, they actually got better on the offense. And just watching him at Michigan, I really think he was unimpressive. Do you think there's any chance of him kind of moving on, that Michigan can actually take a step up and it be a positive?
Well, you look at Michigan last year. I mean, their offense was nothing impressive.
Exactly.
You averaged 400 yards per game, but in conference, that's because you played a weaker schedule. Patterson last year, a 23-8 ratio, but only 56%. Now, a 56% ratio can be fine if your yards per attempt are in the 9s or 10s. And granted, he wasn't in the 6s or 7s. His yards per attempt were 8.0. So it shows he did throw deep to a degree. But again, a 56% completion percentage doesn't cut it when against I'm looking at some of the weaker defenses. Against Rutgers, you threw for 335. Against Michigan State, 384. Indiana, 366. And Ohio State, 305. We know that was in garbage time. So 25 sacks allowed with an experienced O-line and a number 1 draft choice center in Ruiz. Now you have an inexperienced quarterback and a very young O-line. So my concerns for me, Clemson obviously has the easiest walkthrough with the division. And while Michigan and Penn State are much tougher, I just can't see either team really competing with them.
Okay, and Robbie, let's get you in here, man. What are you thinking this upcoming season for Michigan?
Yeah, I think just off of Ralph's last point, I mean, in my power ratings, if they were going to play on a neutral field, Ohio State at this point in time for me would be 13.5 over Penn State and 15.5 over Michigan. So that's not close at this point in time. There's a serious separation between these teams. I know James Franklin is trying to close that gap. He's been trying to become elite for a couple of years. We'll see what they can do. But with Michigan, guys, God, where do I start? And I want to tread lightly here just in case Johnny Detroit's listening. I don't want to insult Michigan too badly here. The offensive line that we talked about being so strong for Penn State, it's the exact opposite in Michigan. Ralph mentioned it. 4 of the 5 starters go in the NFL draft, albeit mostly in later rounds. They lost 4 NFL linemen to the draft. They'll have to replace those. It's not so much the talent when you're replacing offensive linemen. It's the communication. And the center is the most important guy in that communication for Michigan to not be able to get on the field and have 5 guys in unison by the time the season starts. That could be difficult, especially, they catch a break going to Washington week 1 because Washington's under a complete system change on both sides of the ball as well. Though Jimmy Lake's the defensive coordinator, the past defensive coordinator, he's going to keep the defense mostly the same, but they're in an offensive switch, a total overhaul there. So maybe Michigan is catching Washington at a good time out in Seattle by playing them in week 1. Otherwise, when you look down their schedule, the 2 back-to-back games that stick out are the home games. They get them at home, but home against Wisconsin, home against Penn State, back-to-back early on. Weeks 4 and 5, as soon as non-conference season ends, they get thrown into the Big Ten fire pretty quickly. The Shea Patterson deal, I don't know. Will Dylan McCaffrey and Joe Milton, because Michigan has said, Josh Gaddis has said he's going to play both guys. It's not going to be Dylan McCaffrey's show. Joe Milton's the better thrower. McCaffrey's the better runner. And you'll see some kind of game plan devised around that, according to Gaddis right now. Let's get into Josh Gaddis real quick here, because last year the season started miserably for Michigan offensively, and a lot of arrows were being shot at Josh Gaddis, so-called whiz kid, coming in to become offensive coordinator. There were some people who thought maybe Josh Gaddis was nothing more than a product of Coach Franklin, James Franklin's knowledge. I looked at it a different way, guys. When I watched Michigan play their first 3 or 4 games, I just wondered if that wasn't, once again, Jim Harbaugh's reluctance to open up a system. They looked boring. They looked stagnant. They got absolutely stopped by Army, stopped cold by Army. Then they got stopped cold by Wisconsin, which is a really good defensive team. But the offense looked more like a Harbaugh offense than a Gaddis offense. After a while, that offense loosened up. Ralph talked about their total yardage. Let's just go through some stuff here. It is the second year in Gaddis' system, which should be helpful. In their last 10 games last year, they threw for 255 yards per game, which for Michigan would be pretty good. The problem with that yardage is that they only completed 56.5% of the passes. You can't get away with that in modern college football. It's got to be 60 or better, minimum 60, right? We'll see if Milton and McCaffrey can change that. The 4 of the 5 starting offensive linemen down makes me wonder if there won't be a little more pressure on these guys, especially if the running game can't get going. You know, the offensive line, as much as I love the fact that they're coming back for Penn State, I'm a little bit leery of this Michigan offense having to plug in new starters. The defense should be outstanding. But down the stretch, guys, or in the second half of the year, they gain 417 yards against Penn State. Good defense. 437 yards against Notre Dame. Good defense. 396 against Ohio State, one of the top defenses, and 395 against Alabama with all their NFL talent. So I think Josh Gaddis has the offense in his hands now. I don't think Harbaugh's interfering anymore, but it's going to be difficult early on, I think, with that offensive line. Like I say, that Washington game comes at a real good time. We'll see how they handle that tough back-to-back Big Ten deal early in the season.
I'm gonna counter Robbie on one, and I don't like ever arguing with Robbie, but I will say this, Robbie. You pointed out a couple teams that they had a good offensive performance against. Okay, Illinois was young early. Penn State, they were down. Ohio State, they were down big. Alabama, you were down. You know, when a team's playing prevent defense in the second half and your top offensive performances were all games that you trailed in the second half by double-digit points, it's much easier to move the ball in that situation.
Yeah, and you know, that's a great debate, Ralph, because I've had this with guys over the years. When a team is down, the first phrase you would hear out of any play-by-play or analyst's mouth is, well, now the defense can pin their ears back and just rush the passer because they know they have to throw. If you're Alabama and you're Ohio State and you have Chase Young and you have all these guys, you would think that being ahead, you could shut people down. But the other side of that coin is sometimes teams get big leads and relax, and you can pick up a lot of garbage yards. We see it every single week, multiple times in any form of football. So there's always that debate back and forth, which is right. Neither one is right. There's no blanket statement to it. In Michigan's case, I think I like the fact that they got less conservative over the last 9 games or so. I think that, you know, like I say, it looked to me like a Harbaugh offense. Then it looked like they were trying to run this Josh Gaddis offense. So I'll give them a pass because it was the first year in the system and it was drastically different than what they had been running before under Harbaugh. But that offensive line, boy, it's a question mark here. We'll see what happens.
Guys, we got a bunch of chatter here in the chat box. Ryan saying Harbaugh has never found a QB. That's his downfall as a head coach. And also, Robbie, Johnny Detroit's in the house here. He's saying skip Ralph on any Michigan talk. He's a homer from Ohio. Also, plus who can compete with Ohio State, who buys the players the SEC teams can't buy, Ralph? You know, be without sin, cast the first stone when it comes to college football, college basketball recruiting, in my opinion. But he's telling you to settle down, Ralph. Our friend Johnny Detroit here. And Michigan was up at the half and blew it late. So don't know if you have anything
you know, it's am I Ohio State homer? Well, no, not really. I mean, my power ratings are just the numbers they are, and you know, if you're a Michigan fan, I mean, you're going to go to the window and say, I want Michigan plus 17 against Ohio State. What the hell? 17 points? You're Jim Harbaugh. You're Michigan. You had the number 8 recruiting class last year, and you're going to take 17 points? Oh my God.
I guess in his defense, you know, he's the head coach getting all the recruits. Now, I mean, I kind of agree with you in terms of he should have gotten a little bit better production on the field, but you really think he should be shown the door?
Well, I mean, unless Michigan's happy being a second or third place team in the East, sending 8 guys to the NFL and not winning games you're supposed to win, then no, they could keep them. I mean, I know that in Ohio, in Columbus, they have a let's keep Harbaugh fund, and they keep funneling money to Michigan to make sure Michigan keeps them. So.
Yeah, interested in your opinion, Johnny, in the chat in terms of what you think about the Michigan head coaching position, if they should keep Harbaugh. Also, if you want us to send you a link and hop on, let me know. I'll send it on over. We got Indiana up next, guys. The Hoosiers, 8-4 regular season last year, 7-5 ATS, 7-5 over/under is what I'm showing them right here. Also scored more than their opponents by a pretty good margin. 391 points scored, 294 given up. Robbie, what are you thinking for the Hoosiers this upcoming year in Bloomington? Yeah, I guess Robbie might be on mute or something. But Ralph, what are you thinking for Indiana this upcoming year, man?
Well, I was excited. You know, I was high on Indiana last year for one reason, Kalen DeBoer, and
well, they were an absolute moneymaker last year for people, right? 9-4 against the spread, and I'll tell you,
Robbie, we're having a little technical difficulties on your end. If you don't mind logging out and then logging back in, that seemed to fix it last time when we were on off camera. And then we'll get your Indiana opinion. Ralph, what are you thinking this upcoming year for the Hoosiers?
Well, you know, as I said, I was high on him last year because of Kalen DeBoer. And you could go back into my tweets from the beginning of last year, and I said, watch how good Indiana is going to improve on offense. Kalen DeBoer took an Eastern Michigan team and in 3 years turned them into a bowl powerhouse offense. He was at Fresno State a couple years, turned them into that great season, great offense. Indiana, what did he do? 8 wins might not be a lot, but that's the first time Indiana's won 8 games since 1993. So we're talking 27 years. So when you get to 8 wins for Indiana, it's not Michigan. It's a big deal. So the problem is this. DeBoer is gone. He went and deservedly so got the head coaching job at Fresno State. So he's back at where he belongs. You know, looking at the transfer portal sheet that I did, not bad. You lost 2 starters on the transfer portal and you got one in. They got a transfer swan from Indiana. So the transfer portal really didn't hurt them. When you look at Indiana as a whole, last year they were the number 36 recruiting class. So that's fine. That puts them right where Michigan State was. They were 5-4 in the Big Ten. They were plus 35 yards per game. That was number 37 in the country. Remember when I went back and talked to Penn State? I like looking at conference yards per game diff because it gives you a true performance of that team. Indiana was plus 35.3 yards per game in conference play. Penn State at 7-2 was plus 46. So we only had an 11 yard per game difference from being a 5-4 team to a 7-2 team. This year, they're recruiting number 58. It fell back a little bit. They didn't get that 5-star recruit like they had the year before. But experience-wise, number 2 in the Big Ten, number 11 in the country, 17 returning starters, 8 on offense, 9 on defense. Yes, you lost a quarterback who has starting experience to Northwestern as a grad transfer, but he probably wouldn't have won the game anyway because you have Michael Penix Jr. coming in. You do have the new OCs taking over, and I am not a fan of promoting from within. What they did is they promoted their tight end coach in. Did that tight end coach learn this DeBoer offense enough in one season to make it productive again? I just don't know if that's the case. So for that reason, even with the 17 returning starters, that's a down notch for me. Player-wise, they were not very healthy last year. They had to start 40 different players. Remember, 22 are your first string. They almost had to start an entire second string on offense and defense. They had some injuries that were banged up. They didn't play a lot of young guys. They redshirted a lot of guys to have them ready for this year and have them ready moving forward. Looking at their schedule, I have Indiana winning 7.6 games in the mathematical theory. 15-point dog at Wisconsin, 7-point dog to Penn State, 24-point dog to Ohio State, and an 11.5-point dog to Michigan. So those 4 games, you're a touchdown dog. I have those as losses. So at best, I have them at 8 wins. But you look at their other 8 games, 15, 21, 30, 17, 19, 9.5, 13.5, and 9-point favorites. So it's an amazing schedule. Every game, they're either a touchdown plus favorite or a touchdown dog plus dog. So I have no pick'em games. So to me, it's easy. You win those 8 games you're supposed to. You lose those 8 games you're supposed to, and you win back-to-back. You have back-to-back 8-win seasons.
Yeah, great breakdown, Ralph. And Indiana's a team. They had Tennessee in their bowl game and then kind of gave it up at the end there, I remember. But, in this division, in the Big Ten East, it's kind of the big boys and then everybody else. And it's almost like, at least in my opinion, can Indiana kind of reel in the Michigan, Penn State, and Ohio States of the world? It doesn't sound like you think they're going to get there this season, though.
Well, hell, I have them a hell of a lot closer than they were. Let's take a look. I'm trying to flick through my Phil Steele magazine from last year. In 2018 against Penn State, they were plus 14.5 at home. This year, I'm plus 7.5. So, how often does a 7-point home dog win games? 32% of the time. So 1 or 2 turnovers could switch them, but I clearly have them much closer to Penn State than they've ever been in the past.
Okay. And Robbie, not sure about your connection, man. Go ahead with any Indiana speak, though. Yeah, I think I don't know. His computer's frozen or something. So having a look, we'll go a duel here down the stretch of the Big Ten East. We're up against it time wise anyway, Ralph. So we got Michigan State Sparty up next, 6-6 regular season last year, just 3-9 ATS. Money burner last year. Talking about the Michigan State Spartans here, and over under 5-7, trending towards the under. What are you thinking about Sparty from East Lansing, Ralph?
Well, Drew, let's just bunch the last 3 together. And, because we're looking at, besides beating each other, because they're in the same division, Michigan State, Maryland, and Rutgers, you're probably only going to get 1 or 2 Big Ten wins besides those teams. You look at Michigan State this year, only 10 returning starters, worst in the Big Ten, only 3 on defense. And don't forget, you had D'Antonio, who was the glue to this team, who didn't recruit as well as Michigan, but always could beat the big brother. He got a $4.3 million bonus. And then what did he do? 3 weeks after getting that bonus, he left, and he left in February, the day before the recruiting class. That's why they were number 43. They lost a couple of late players that were going to recruit with them. So you're number 117 in experience. You're number 43. You have the last coach hired in Mel Tucker. I just see problems for them. Maryland's a team with only 11 returning starters this year. Mike Loxley is in the second season. Do credit Mike Loxley. He is a good recruiter. He got a lot of crap at New Mexico for what went on, but he can recruit. Maryland, the number 31 recruiting class. They're coming off a 1-8 season in the Big Ten. Both them and Rutgers, 122 and 124 in yards per game diff in conference play. Maryland was 1-8. Rutgers was 0-9. So, again, I don't want to bunch 3 bad teams together, but 10 starters for Michigan State, 11 for Maryland. Rutgers does have 17 with Schiano, but Rutgers also had 22 players in the transfer portal. A lot of guys left, including 5 guys that made starts. So, I look at those and I look at those 3 teams, and I have Maryland as a double-digit dog in 7 games and a dog of 3 or more in 9 games. I have Rutgers a double-digit dog in 9 games and a 3-point-plus dog in 11 of 12 games. And Michigan State, a dog, double-digit dog, 3 games, a dog of 3 or more in 6 games, and Michigan State is a double-digit favorite in 2 games and a sizable favorite. So Michigan State may win a few games, but that's because of their non-conference schedule. And they play, of course, Maryland and Rutgers. They're still better than those 2 teams, but if you take out what those 3 teams play against each other, you may get a total of 1 win, and that's it.
And Ralph, a couple questions here just to end it. Talking about Mel Tucker here, he had some success, obviously, at Colorado, or he wouldn't have gotten the job and gotten the money here. Would you actually look to bet on Michigan State with him out the gate, or what is your overall view here of Mel Tucker and what he's going to do with the Michigan State program?
I don't know. They obviously, you were in a jam because everyone that got hired that should have been hired. So why do you hire Mel Tucker? Well, it's obvious because he's a Big Ten guy. He went to Wisconsin. He was a GA here. He was a grad assistant, so he has some ties here. So I think that's why you brought him. Colorado, he 2019 was his only year in Colorado. Before that, he was a Georgia DC, and he was at Alabama for a year and then in the Bears. So, 1 year at Colorado doesn't show me he can have success because you're taking the kids that were there before, you're trying to make changes. I think he's got a long time coming here, and I just think it's going to be tough. D'Antonio got some recruits from Michigan. I just think now Michigan keeps all the in-state kids that sometimes they lost to Michigan State. So I think Sparty's in trouble for a couple of years.
Yeah, I could see that happen. I was just thinking, Mel Tucker, like you talked about, he kind of has the resume to profile as a good coach here at the major level. And then what about a handicapping angle here in the Big Ten? Teams like Rutgers coming from, talking about sports betting and having success is kind of finding change. And this year is going to be, we're going to have as much change as any year since I've been doing this. Teams like Rutgers during this pandemic, where they're located, would you actually look to kind of even fade them more than you normally would because of situations that are happening with the pandemic this year?
Well, one thing I want to bring up, and I skipped it on the Indiana Hoosiers. Indiana Hoosiers lost their strength coach to Alabama. And that's a big deal because the strength coach is the one guy who's allowed to talk to kids all year round, talk about their weight training and their diets, and he sets plans for those. So to lose their strength coach late like they did in this pandemic, I think that hurts Indiana. One thing when I see a Maryland or a Rutgers team that, they were combined 1-17 in the Big Ten last year, Maryland's won 5 straight games as a home favorite. They've covered 5 straight games as a home favorite the last 2 years. When you see Rutgers and Maryland, Rutgers plays Monmouth week 1. We don't talk about a lot of FBS versus FCS games, but when those crappy teams have the ability to beat an opponent, I do like betting on that team because they know they're not going to win many games. They are completely focused. They are not looking past any opponent. So in that situation, I do look at Rutgers and Maryland to beat those inferior foes.
Interesting. Okay. And Ryan, I was more talking about his profile in the past there. We also got Maurice Allen talking about how many East teams make a bowl game this year, Ralph. Off the top of your head, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, Indiana. Would you go 4?
Yeah, that's it. I don't have Michigan State. As I said, Michigan State's a dog in 6 of those games. I think they lose a couple of those pick'em games as well. I think it's clear. It's a clear 4 this year and pretty well set.
Okay, cool. And guys, WagerTalk YouTube channel. We're here each and every Tuesday, 1:00 Eastern time. college football preview show. So come join us. We're doing this. I love just taking notes here, guys, getting ready on what Ralph and Robbie Veno think. Apologize for the technical difficulties, not having Robbie Veno. We'll get his quick thoughts here on the East. We're doing the Big Ten West next week. So come back and join us. And Ralph, anything else you want to throw out there before we shut this down, man?
Don't miss next week's show. I think it's one of the most competitive divisions in all of football. When you have a team that finished first in Minnesota and then Wisconsin, and your last place teams are Purdue and Northwestern, which are going to be greatly improved, I can make a point for any 7 of those teams next week to win the Big Ten West.
Nice. Okay, guys. So come back and join us for sure. And yeah, guys, appreciate it. If you could smash the like button on your way out, that does help us out. Give Ralph a follow on Twitter at CalSportsLV, myself at Drew Martin Betts. Guys, we got a new golf show coming up, and Kelly in Vegas is hosting it. Nick Borman's on there, so he's got great golf picks along with some other handicappers. So make sure to check that out. Looking to bet golf as it starts to take center stage here, Ralph. That will be a fun show on the WagerTalk YouTube.
Yeah, Koken shot me an email saying, I can't believe how much I studied golf this week, and there's really 4 matchups I like. I think Dave's on that golf show as well. So I know Dave put his due diligence in to get some matchup winners for the show.
Cool. So yeah, guys, check it out right here on the WagerTalk YouTube channel. Thanks for the time, guys. Best of luck with your bets, and we'll talk to you next week.